Okay. So, I'll get you guys to introduce yourselves. Shall we start with you, Kat? Tell us about
Sure.
yourself.
My name is Kat Tobin. I'm the co-owner and managing director of Pelgrane Press, and we publish tabletop role-playing games that focus on strong narrative and characterization.
Okay. And yourself, Conor?
Hi, I'm Conor Kostick. I'm an author and also publisher for the Level Up, which publishes lit RPG books. And I suppose relevant to the discussion as well is, as a teenager, I had a job in Treasure Trap, which was the first live LARPing effort, to be a commercial endeavour in Overton Castle.
Excellent. So I'm going to ask a question. How did that sort of starting out on LARP end up with you moving into publishing?
Well, my role in the LARP was to write the scenarios, so it's not that far removed from writing books. You're thinking about characters and the plot and the encounters, and also lit RPG is very heavy in game mechanic in the books. You actually witness the characters making decisions around the game mechanics, and you get game mechanic references. So, and that's a bit like Treasure Trap was, because you wouldn't just design an adventure in terms of character. You'd be thinking about how many hit points the monsters have. We used coloured dye for damage, so if you're hit by red, you get 6 points of damage. White was 10, this kind of thing. So you'd be planning all that. You'd have to write the script for the wizard, but also say you have, 3 magic missiles, a dagger with red dye. So that kind of gamification of the story was something I've been doing for a long time.
Mm-hmm. What about yourself, Kat? Did you do gaming before you got into publishing, or did you just fall into gaming after you fell into publishing?
So I've been gaming for a very long time, since the late 90s. I got into it in college. So I've always been a kind of a pretty hardcore role player since kind of university anyway. So my path, I guess, came more from the production kind of side of things. My hobby background is in gaming event management and event organization. So I came at it from effectively being like a project manager for different events. So I ran conventions in Ireland. I ran a convention in London. I co-founded another convention in Ireland. So I was quite used to working with, I was quite used to basically producing an event for games. And that seemed like quite an intuitive step then from that into actual publishing, because similarly, when you're publishing books, you're effectively project managing them. So the process is quite similar. A lot of the skills that I picked up in event management are really transferable to publishing, in terms of like managing groups of people, getting workloads delivered to deadline and that kind of thing. So yeah, so it actually seemed like quite an intuitive step. But then I was working in finance in my day job as well, so that was less relevant at the start. But now that I actually co-own the company, that kind of financial background is really important as well, because you have to be able to keep the money flowing and the money going to make sure that your business goes.
So when you're picking a good project to work with people on, to work people developing on, what makes a good project? What are the things that jump out at you when you get a pitch in, or when you're coming up with an idea of things that you want to work with people on? What jumps out and says, this is going to be good, this is going to work?
So for me, I think there's, the first thing is it's a matter of personal taste. everyone has their own, like even in literature or film, you have your own things, ideas and tropes and genres that you particularly prefer. So that's kind of one aspect of it. But for me, I guess there are three kind of criteria that I'm looking for a project to fit to when I'm considering taking it on. The first one is like Pelgrane as a company is really quite focused on innovation. So we want to be constantly doing new and interesting things with role playing as a medium and as a hobby. So I'm looking for games that are really quite different to what's kind of come before. I'm really interested in what's kind of happening in the D&D RPG space and also in the kind of the Nordic LARP spaces. I think they're really kind of pushing the boundaries of what we understand role playing to be. So I'm looking for something that's quite innovative, that's doing interesting new things and taking the hobby in a different direction. I'm also looking for something that will allow me to bring in newer writers as well. I always have half an eye out for being able to bring more people into the hobby, especially people who maybe haven't traditionally had the opportunity to have their voices heard in the hobby. And then kind of the third thing, and again, coming back to what I was saying earlier about the finances and the money, you have to have an eye on the money. You have to kind of look at a project and go, well, I think this is cool, but will my audience think it's cool? Will the people who we're making games for, like our community, will they think it's cool? Is it the kind of thing that they've told us that they're looking for, or is it the kind of thing that we know that they're interested in, from kind of discussions on our forums and that kind of thing. So making sure that it's kind of commercially viable as well, that there's an actual kind of market that we can sell it into is kind of my third criteria.
Okay.
That's a smart question because you've put it across in such a way as it applies to publishing books as well as publishing games. And something Kat said there resonated with me. For one thing, I am looking for more women writers and strong female characters. I don't know how much lit RPG anyone's read here, but at the moment the genre is sexist to some extent. The early writers tended to be from Russia, and whilst the books are actually really good in a lot of respects, they have some weaknesses when it comes to the way they present women. So it's time that the genre moved on a bit and got a more a better balance of voices, better diversity of character. So that's one thing, definitely. For me, I'm looking for good writing. So if someone had a really good idea, but it was clear that they had no experience in writing, I'd probably turn it down. Because I made the mistake with one of the early books of, one of the early commissions, not of accepting it on the strength of the idea. And then I had to do loads and loads and loads of the rewrite. I mean, pretty much every sentence. So I'm not doing that again. I want to work with writers who I can say, like, well, big picture stuff, like, you really need that character, or it doesn't make sense to me that this would happen here. What do you think? So I can bounce ideas around and be confident that they'll go away. They won't necessarily agree with me, and I don't mind that. We'll have the discussion, and they can do it their way. But I want them to be confident they'll deliver a good manuscript and a good read for the reader. That's one thing. And then I suppose the other thing is there's a particular addiction about lit RPG that's almost unique, although maybe we can recognize it in other things. But the way when you watch a video of someone playing a game, you're watching, I don't know, someone playing Minecraft, right? You would not think that interesting because you're not making any decisions. You're just watching someone else do it. And yet lit RPG works like that. So you actually want this character and you turn the pages and you stay up late to see this character advance, to get the levels, to unlock the sword, all the stuff from gaming is surprisingly addictive when it's done well. So I am looking for a pitch that suggests the author understands that buzz and understands that readers want that sense of advancement and achievement within a game.
Thank you very much. Good answers, both of you. So, next question. what is your least favourite thing about the publishing industry, from your respective perspectives on it?
Well, for me, in the world of book publishing, I don't like the fact that there's a kind of an exponential curve for sales. Well, not so much sales, but also for income. So there's a very, very long, low tail where there's a very, very low income, and then the stratospheric, the top. There's millions, and I'd love to see that as a more of a line than an exponential curve, because what it means is most people I work with will not get a good remuneration for the time, and I'd love them to. I really would. I mean, they get other satisfactions. It's satisfying having a book out, getting reader feedback and so on. There's pleasure in that, and it's life affirming. But I do warn people who sign up that for most of the time it doesn't make a lot of money. A couple of $1,000 a year maybe. But then you might roll a 20. You might get critical. At the top end, there are millions being made. So I'd love to see. I don't know how one could do this, but because I don't think I'm not talking about sort of heavily taxing the top one and giving it to the other writers. I'm talking about some sort of crowdsourcing of platforms of sharing the love of the success. That kind of it comes down the chain a bit more than it does at the moment.
Yeah.
Over to you, Kat. Sorry.
Yeah, I think that's a really valuable point, and it's the exact same issue that we have in the role playing industry. We've got kind of WotC and Paizo and maybe Fantasy Flight are like the big three companies, and there is such a gulf between them and literally everyone else in the industry. It's like you said, the scale is exponential between where they are and kind of where the rest of us are. So I think that's really problematic. I don't know how to resolve it. We're selling as many books as we can, but we we can't remunerate our writers and our artists and our layout people the way that we would want to be able to. And that is frustrating when you see somebody put their heart and soul into work and not, like you said, and just not knowing that you can't give them a fair wage for that work. That's really, really deeply frustrating. And a lot of people in our industry are kind of, they're kicking off about that, and justifiably, understandably, and demanding better rates for writers. And they're absolutely right, and they absolutely should be. But the simple fact is, the money isn't there for the people at our size. We just don't have the money to pay better rates. So that is deeply frustrating. Again, a lot of the kind of the legacy of where we've come from in RPGs in particular, because we've come from war games, and there's a lot of privilege given to fantasy games, I guess, in role playing, and to genre games in general, and that's also something that I find frustrating. Like, role playing is a medium, and you can use that medium to tell any kind of story, and yet most companies are just hitting up the same tropes again and again and again. And I would love to see it broaden out more, and for us to be making different types of games, and and telling the type of stories that you can tell with our medium. So yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. What would you say is the most underrepresented genre in what you deal with?
Yeah, that's really difficult, because there's kind of fantasy, sci-fi, horror, and then everything else is underrepresented. So so it's kind of hard to choose one in particular. I mean, I definitely think that there aren't enough kind of Jane Austen games. Like there aren't enough kind of, more of that kind of interpersonal, kind of dramatic, like more, yeah, just more kind of focus on the characterization. I'd like to see a lot more of that.
We might diverge here because it's because what I'm looking to publish and what people are looking to read is often in this fantasy genre, and I don't mind that at all. I wouldn't be looking to necessarily push the boat out and have Call of Cthulhu lit RPG. I don't mind. I'd be interested, or a 19th century British Navy RPG. As the game mechanics. I wouldn't be too eager for anything like that. I wouldn't be. It's not our readers wouldn't necessarily be wanting to test their boundaries and experiment and find something edgy. And I'm happy not to do that. I mean, personally, I enjoy avant-garde art in music and literature and so on, but I also enjoy reading a good RPG with a very traditional. I think because you kind of, in a way, you use the tropes, and your focus is not on, an elf, a dwarf. What are their characters going to be like? The focus is on what's the game challenge. And here I am interested in something original. If someone says this is an original game mechanic, this is something that you could exploit, but you'd have to be pretty smart. And if they maybe had a focus on being a blacksmith in order to triumph in a game, that's very interesting to me. So, and because the focus of that book would be all about the, I don't know, the politics of sourcing mineral supplies, or I don't know what it would be, right? But in a way, you'd want all the rest to be given. You wouldn't want to have to invent a whole new world and get the reader familiar to some alien world. It'd be good to hand them a sort of World of Warcraft environment as a given, but then what's not given is this new way of rising to the top within the game. And that's what I'd love to see more of. Smart gameplay, rather than just sort of big warriors grinding their way up the levels. So throw it back for another one.
Yep. What is the most unusual character that you have encountered that works in your work, or sort of the most unusual sort of scenario and situation?
Yeah, I've got an
actually
easy
still
answer to that,
works?
and it's going to be out later this year. We're at quite an advanced stage in terms of the text. Still working on the cover. So the character is the dungeon. So he's a priest for a Foxkin community. He gets killed at the opening chapter, but the goddess brings him back to learn to be a dungeon. So he goes up in sophistication as a dungeon. He's puts the traps inside. He summons the monsters. So he's advancing as a dungeon, and the goal is to protect his people by interposing himself against their enemies. This is great. This is very unique character. But what we struggled with a bit was his relationships, because he fancied someone in his tribe before he got bumped off. And how can you have a relationship if you're a dungeon and they're a fox? Certainly not going to be a sexual one anyway. So so he's it does dilute his relationships, which is a challenge to make the normal sort of dynamics of relationships still interest the reader. But it's a good, unique character, that one.
Yeah. Is my mic back on?
Yes.
Great. Awesome. My answer again is going to be kind of similar, because one of the most interesting characters I've ever come across is the main kind of villain antagonist NPC one of Gareth Ryder Hanrahan's books, Eyes of the Stone Thief for 13th Age, and that's actually a living dungeon. So the dungeon itself is the kind of the concept of the campaign is that there's this ancient living dungeon called the Stone Thief, and every now and again it'll kind of like just swallow whole villages and castles and people, and they'll be like Jonah and the whale, they'll be kind of processed in its belly effectively, and the adventurers have to go through that living dungeon and all of the different areas within it. And it's just, again, it shouldn't work at all, but it has quite a distinct character as well. Like, it's really cold. It's a really, really cold character. And it's just fantastic how Gar's managed to kind of create such a strong sense of identity out of, essentially remains of other castles and dungeons and villages that this stone thief has eaten over its life, that the PCs are fighting their way through. It's really good. It shouldn't work at all, but it really, really does. Yeah, it's great.
Okay. So, if you were to go back in time to speak to yourself when you first started out, what would be the most important piece of advice that you could give them?
Ooh, Kat, could you go first? I need to gather my thoughts.
I know, yeah. I'm kind of, gosh, I'm kind of struggling as well. I mean, I think with these questions, I always instinctively go to like big mistakes that I feel I've made, or things that I've done that in retrospect maybe I could have not done, and that would have been better. But that's not really I don't think that's kind of what you're asking. I think that probably the main advice that I would give myself is to trust myself more. Certainly, I know that when I, like I said, I've been role playing for, more than 20 years now, and I've played a lot of games. I've, run a lot of games. I've read a lot of games. I know, I'm quite familiar with role playing with concepts, but certainly for me coming into Pelgrane, the people that I was working with are so, at the very, very top of the game that I was quite kind of intimidated for a long time about sharing my opinions on things. So I think that is probably advice I would have given myself, that, that I do know some stuff. So, just to trust that I'm here for a reason, Yeah.
So to my young self as an author, I'd probably say encourage myself to stick with Epic. I wrote Epic in 2004, and it's huge international success, 100,000 copies sold. But I moved away from it, and I think that I perhaps was a little bit thinking that it was that I could do something more in more depth, and I think I underestimated the the sort of sense that if something's commercially successful, maybe it's not that particularly good work of art, right? Maybe it's a sort of 50 Shades or Da Vinci Code or something that you wouldn't be particularly proud of the writing, but obviously very happy with the size of your audience. So maybe there's a little bit of that, but I moved away from it anyway, and I think maybe that was a mistake, because actually in hindsight now, as whenever that was about 16 years ago, it might actually be my best book. It's even though it was commercial success, that doesn't mean it was a poorly written book. It was so maybe I should have stuck with doing that and had less slightly. Perhaps I was a teeny bit snobby towards my own work. That'd be one thing. And then as a publisher of Lit RPG, well, I've only been going a little over a year, so it's too early to say what I would tell myself of a year ago. I think that I need to learn more about the economics of the situation. I need to learn about the way Facebook ads works properly, about Amazon. There's a whole skill set that I'm only slowly getting up to speed on.
What is the one thing that you wouldn't do without in terms of your toolkit?
So I use quite a lot of different tools, like very different, so as a remote worker, my communication tools like email, and we use Slack for kind of staying in touch and chatting and stuff. So that, I mean, obviously those are like literally vital. And then I use InDesign for the actual layout of our books, and Photoshop as well for, like Conor was saying, with the marketing side, for doing graphics and social media posts and that kind of thing. And they're all kind of, they're all, I guess, like the vital tools that I need to do the job that I'm doing. But I think that really, again, coming back to the kind of the project management aspect of it, having a good planning tool, a good overall planner is really quite important. And I haven't yet found, I use Asana at the moment, and it works for me quite a lot, but it's not exactly doing exactly what I needed to be doing. So I haven't found anything yet that is really kind of singing to me and going, actually, in saying that, Evernote. I use Evernote, which is a note-taking software for everything, like for literally everything in my life. So actually, if there's one thing, I'll have to say it's Evernote that I couldn't do without.
Yeah,
So.
I mean, I think Microsoft Word is so dominant. It's essential, really. Although one does has to watch its desire to tell you what's correct grammar, and sometimes correct grammar isn't the effect you need on a page. One needs to know good grammar, but some of the choices they make aren't always suitable for us as writers. And Google Docs is just great, for sharing work in progress. I do have Asana. I got Git Scrum had an offer for a lifetime subscription, really cheap, a while back, so I got that and work on that. But I just find I don't I set off with good intentions of using it and being all nice and organized, and I just don't keep it updated. And whereas the comments Docs is a good way of communicating with the writers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Google Docs, another plus one there for Google Docs. It's fantastic, really, what it gives you.
Okay, I'm going to open this up to questions. Does anyone have any questions that they would like to ask? And that includes you guys. You can ask each other questions if you want.
Thanks. Thank you.
Open this door. Wait, Dad, you locked me out.
I did, yeah, but it didn't do any good. Okay, look at my friend. Say hi.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi. Hello, what's your name?
Oh, wait.
Tove. Named after Toby Anson, the great Finnish
Yeah.
writer.
One, Dad.
What are you?
One.
I think that's somebody that wants your daddy.
Yeah. I think so. Oh.
Remember, I went to rocking chair.
I don't remember that. Want to tell about your dream last night? Great dream, didn't you?
Yeah.
What was your dream about?
It was a monster, wasn't it? And it went.
A monster.
Scary and exciting dream, I think. He's sort of acting it out for the benefit of those who are listening rather than viewing.
I tell them when I brush my teeth.
My dream last night was about convention rooms eating me. So
Yeah, it gets a bit like that, doesn't it?
But on
I
TV.
yeah. I have I think I think there's a lot to be said for letting the unconscious come into play in our line of work. And I noticed when I was writing Epic that I was so intensely involved with the book that I was dreaming about it. And occasionally I would solve an actual, wide awake.
Daddy, I have poetry on your phone.
Yeah, I would. A sort of issue that was troubling me, that was kind of maybe a plot issue, or how do you bring these two characters together, I would resolve in the course of that sort of semi-sleepy state of mind as you're falling asleep, thinking about your project. So I learned the value of having a little notebook beside my bed, and jotting down my eyes. So not the deep sleep, but that kind of that little zone where you're sort of half in, half out, is a very creative zone.
So I'm going to go into a complete tangent here, away from publishing, and go back to the LARPing thing and the gaming thing. because I'm curious.
Daily on the scene.
Treasure Trap.
Yeah.
What was sort of the main thing about that for you? What drew you to it? How did you end up working for it?
Oh, well, you got to imagine 19, long hair, 1983. So the world is going very Tory and Thatcherite, and then you've got this little, like Asterix the Gauls village, this little enclave of gamers. All of whom were very hedonistic, and this was the pre-AIDS era, so there was a very permissive, and you've got all these people coming to a castle, dressing up in fantasy costume, and inhabiting this fantasy space for weekends. It's what's not to like? It was just amazing. And
hey, that's a Paw Patrol.
Thanks, Toto. Yeah. So so just on a sort of personal level, this is real. It was a real growing up period. It was great to be, Wordsworth when he says, "Joy is was to be alive, but young the very heavens." It's if you're living in a revolutionary moment and you're a teenager, brilliant. That's just. And it was a bit of a revolutionary moment. There was a little bubble of counterculture. LARP was in its infancy, and we were still working out the rules, and that was enjoyable too.
Daddy, you get it loud.
Well, no, because I have to talk. So there was some pretty smart people involved. I remember a guy called Steve Duke who deserves a lot of credit, because I think that some of his ideas have fed their way through and rippled in a diluted way all the way through to the big LARPs today.
Put it louder when I get out.
So most of you'll know. Do you know RuneQuest? You'll know RuneQuest, if you will. Classic. Well,
Put it louder when I get out.
I will do. Yeah, you can go out and take that. So we found that RuneQuest was the game closest to our needs. Because when you're looking at a person who's covered in dye, having a grid of the body and hit points assigned to the parts of the body is a much better system than some sort of overall D&D one. And the D&D mechanics don't really work. It don't really make sense. Like, what does it mean to have 100 hit points? And then, so someone can't possibly kill you with a dagger under any circumstance. So we wanted a system where, look, if there's a red thing across your throat, you're dead, So that worked a lot better for us. And I got the invite simply because the castle was nearby Chester where I was growing up, and I was a member of Chester War Games Club. So these guys, the entrepreneurs, came in. I say entrepreneurs, Chester's like another word for them, and they came in and said, "Look, we were setting up this game. We want help. We want advice, but we think that the moment's right for it. We've got this castle. Brilliant! What a location! I mean, unbelievable. I don't think any LARP's had as good a location since." And so I volunteered at first, and then broke my parents' hearts by dropping out of university to do it full time.
So, Kat, question:
I think you might be muted.
Kat, I have a question for you, which is, of the games you've played to date, what's the one that you've really enjoyed playing in the most?
Is that a question from Craig? No, I'm sure it's not. Because I'm not sure if my GM for the game that I'm going to say is here. Yeah, so the game that I think it's at this point it's going to be hard to ever kind of catch up with is Buffy the Vampire Slayer campaign that I played in for I want to say 6 years, and it was in GAES in Edinburgh Uni that I first started playing it. We managed to get a kind of a really quite magical combination of players, and we were all playing young watchers, who were kind of learning to become watchers, and we were running at the same time as kind of Buffy the TV show. So by the time we got to our 7th season, was also the 7th season of Buffy, where Watcher HQ kind of had, I won't spoiler it, even though I know it's quite old, had things happen to it, let's say. So we ended up suddenly being kind of catapulted into like senior government in the Watcher Society, and it was quite interesting because we'd taken those characters from being university students like the whole way through, and yeah, so it was just a really great kind of a chemistry between the players, and the characters were all really well defined, and they all had their own kind of niches, in the same way that the kind of Buffy characters are structured. And it was just like a really great combination of story and character, and everything just kind of came together in that one Buffy game. So yeah, it'll be hard to catch up with that now, I think, because it was so long ago for me, yeah.
Well, thank you very much for coming along and participating in the panel. Hopefully you've enjoyed yourselves. I've very much enjoyed your stories and giving you awkward questions because I'm evil. So thanks very much. If people would like to check out the links on the guest page, you'll find links to Pelgrim Press, you'll find links to Lit RPG, where you can go and find out more about what our guests actually do. Next up in here will be the speech from the charity for the event, which is the Grassmarket Community Project. I'm expecting Johnny Kinross, who is their managing director, to come in and tell people a bit more about that in the next sort of 5-10 minutes or so. And then the charity auction will be at shortly after 6 over in the Discord channel.
Cool.
Thanks
Excellent.
a lot.
Thanks very much.
Sorry about the interruption.
No, she's adorable. It was really good. So
Bye.
I will post a link to this so that people who didn't join us from the beginning can see the whole thing.
All right. Thanks very much. Bye.